That voice cut straight through the thunder like a blade of pure, icy steel. The stormy night crashed down on the cliffs of Blackwood Ravine in West Virginia, turning everything into a thick, suffocating curtain of black. The rain did not simply fall. It lashed. It struck. It accused. Dominic Vaughn stood there on the edge of the abyss, facing the man he had trusted for 18 years. Marcus Thorne, cousin, right hand, the one he had raised like a younger brother since Marcus was 16 years old. The peace negotiation with Viktor Kozlov had ended only minutes ago. Kozlov and his men had withdrawn, leaving Dominic and Marcus alone on this cliff. That was when Dominic realized it. Too late. Kozlov had never come to negotiate. He had come to witness. This was a trap. And the one who set it was none other than the man standing in front of him. Marcus stepped forward, eyes cold as steel, with nothing left of the boy who once wept at his mother's funeral. Rain streamed down his face, but it could not wash away the cruelty etched into every line. Dominic could feel the brink directly behind him, the rock slick and treacherous beneath his soles. "Marcus, what are you?" He did not get to finish. Marcus's hand slammed into his chest with all the force of betrayal that had been building for 15 years. Dominic lost his balance. The world tilted. The rain became the sky. The sky became the abyss. And the king of the underworld began to fall. The wind tore at his ears as his body plunged. Branches snapped with a harsh crack as he struck them. Bone met rock with a dry, sickening sound. Then silence. Only the rain and thunder growling far away. Marcus stood at the edge, staring down into the darkness. The rain whipped his face, but he did not blink. He waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. No cry for help. No groan. Only the silence of death. A smile slowly spread across Marcus's mouth. 15 years in the shadows. 15 years bowing his head and saying yes, Dominic, and, of course, Dominic. 15 years being a loyal dog for a man who never truly saw him. It all ended tonight. He turned away and walked from the edge. In his mind, he was already rehearsing. Tears. He would need tears. A trembling voice. Kozlov ambushed us. Dominic. He fell. I could not save him. He would stand before the entire organization, eyes reddened, shoulders shaking, playing the grief-stricken younger brother who had lost his brother. And then he would sit in the chair Dominic had occupied for 18 years. This empire would be his. Everything would be his. Marcus vanished into the rain, his shape swallowed by the dark. He did not look back. A victor does not need to look back. But there was something Marcus did not know, something his arrogance would never allow him to see. 20 meters away, hidden behind thick thorn bushes, there was a figure. A young woman stood as still as a statue, soaked from head to toe. Mud clung to her cheeks, mixed with rainwater. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, not breathing, witnessing everything. Alara Sinclair had seen it all. She saw the shove. She saw the fall. She heard the sound of bone striking stone, and she saw the killer walk away with a satisfied smile on his lips. Her heart pounded so violently she thought it might break through her ribs. Every instinct in her screamed, "Run! This is not your business. You saw nothing. You know nothing. Run and forget it all." But her feet would not move. She stood there in the thorn bushes, rain lashing her body, staring at the cliff's edge where the man had disappeared. Evil had moved freely. But hidden in the darkness, a ghost was watching, and tonight was nowhere near over. If this story touched your heart, please press the like button and share it with the people you love. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next emotional stories. We read all of your comments. Alara Sinclair stood motionless in the thorn bushes, her heart beating wildly, as if it might shatter her ribs from the inside. Rain ran down her face, blending with the mud that had clung to her skin since she slipped while checking her rabbit traps. She could not breathe. Or maybe she was breathing too fast, so fast she could no longer tell the difference. What she had just witnessed could not be real. One man pushing another man into a ravine, right in front of her, only 20 meters away. The survival instinct she had sharpened over the past 5 years screamed inside her skull. "Run! This is not your business. You saw nothing. You know nothing. Go back to the cabin. Lock the door. Forget everything." And she almost did. Almost. Because Alara Sinclair had spent 5 years surviving by staying away from people. 5 years speaking to no one unless she had to. 5 years hiding in these woods like a ghost. The people of Hollow Creek called her Ghost Girl, the girl who was a ghost. At first she hated the name. Then she accepted it. Because a ghost does not have to feel. A ghost does not have to hurt. A ghost can watch the world pass by without taking part in it. She had built her life around that invisibility. A small cabin in the forest, traps for food, herbs to treat herself. No one needed her, and she needed no one. That was how she endured. That was how she ran from what had happened 5 years ago. Her feet had already begun to turn, ready to leave, when that sound rose up, from the depths. Not thunder, not wind. A groan, weak, broken, but unmistakably human. Alara froze. Her whole body went rigid, as if someone had poured ice water through her veins. That groan sounded like a call from the dead, like someone clinging to life with blood-slick fingers. The memory slammed into her without warning. Another voice erupted in her head, sharp and painful enough to nearly bring her to her knees. Alara, do not let go. A small hand, tiny fingers, slipping, sliding out of her grasp, falling into black water. She blinked. The memory dissolved like fog under sunlight, but the pain stayed behind. It always stayed. The groan from the ravine rose again, dragging her back into the present. That man was still alive. The man who had been shoved into the abyss was still alive. And she could leave. She should leave. This was not her business. She did not know who he was. She owed him nothing. She was only a ghost, and ghosts do not save people. But the last time she walked away after hearing a cry for help, someone died. Someone she loved more than her own life died, and she had carried that death inside her chest for 5 years. Her feet began to move, not turning away, moving forward. She did not stand. She did not run. She crawled. Her hands clawed through mud, her knees carved through the soaked earth, inch by inch toward the edge. Thorns tore her skin. Stones sliced her palms. Rain lashed her back like whips. But she did not stop, because last time she stopped, last time she walked away, and she had lived with that choice in her own private hell for 5 years. She could not do it one more time. Alara crawled to the edge of the ravine, her fingers clamped tight in the soaked earth. Her heart hammered out of control as she slowly leaned forward and looked down into the darkness below. She saw nothing, only a thick, heavy blackness, and the sound of rain pouring into the deep like a waterfall. Then lightning flashed. In that instant, in that brief moment, when light tore the night open, she saw him. A man caught on an old tree limb about 15 feet above the ground. That limb was like the hand of fate, reaching out from the cliff wall and snatching him mid-fall on his way to hell. Blood ran from a wound on his head, spreading red across his face and mixing with the rain. His clothes, though torn and smeared with mud, still revealed expensive fabric she had never touched in her life. This was not an ordinary man, but that did not matter. What mattered was that his hands were shaking as they clung to the branch, each finger blanched white from strain. His strength was draining away. She could see it in the way his body sagged, in the way his arms trembled in waves. He could not hold on much longer. Lightning flashed again, and this time their eyes met. His eyes looked up, through the rain, through the dark, and locked onto hers. In those eyes, Alara did not see begging. She saw astonishment, as if he could not believe anyone was here, as if he had accepted death and then, suddenly, been handed a chance to live. Alara did not think. She moved. Her hand went to her belt, where the rope she used for tying rabbit traps was still wrapped. She pulled it free, her fingers trembling from cold and fear. The rope was old, frayed, but still strong. She had used it to drag heavy bundles of firewood up a slope. It would hold. It had to hold. She looked around for an anchor point. A few meters away, a thick tree root jutted up from the ground like a giant's fist. She crawled to it, looped the rope around the root once, twice, then tied the tightest knot she knew. She tugged to test it. The root did not move. Good. She turned back to the edge and let the other end fall into the darkness. The rope dropped and swung in the wind and rain. She looked down, trying to judge the distance. The end stopped less than 1 meter from his hand. He stared at the rope, then up at her. He tried to reach, but his body was already too weak. His fingers touched the rope and slid away. He reached again and slid away again. Alara saw the branch shudder under his weight. It was about to break, and then she did what she had not done for 5 years. She screamed, "Grab it!" Her voice ripped through the night, echoing across the ravine, hoarse, unfamiliar, like the voice of the dead brought back to life. She was shocked by the sound that came out of her own throat. 5 years without speaking, and the first word she forced into the world was a desperate scream for a stranger. But it worked. The man looked up, eyes wide, as if her voice had poured strength into him. He threw his arm up again, and this time his fingers closed around the rope. She saw him wrap it around his wrist and cinch it tight. She did not wait. She wound the other end around her waist, sat back, braced her feet into the ground, and began to pull. His weight nearly yanked her off the earth. She clenched her teeth, drove her heels deep into the mud, and pulled again. The rope bit into her palms, slicing across the old scar she had carried for 5 years. Blood flowed, mixing with rainwater, but she did not stop. She slid toward the edge, the mud offering too little friction to hold her. 1 inch, 2 inches. She nearly fell after him into the dark, but she did not let go. This time she did not let go. She ground her teeth until her jaw ached, gathered herself, and pulled one more time. She heard him scrape for purchase on rock, heard gravel spill into the ravine. He was climbing. She pulled again. He climbed again, inch by inch, second by second, until a blood-soaked hand appeared over the edge, then the second hand, then his head, then his shoulders. Alara pulled one final time, with every last ounce of strength left in her thin body, and he collapsed onto the ground right beside her, both of them lying there, gasping in the mud beneath the rain that still would not stop. She did not know who he was. She did not know she had just saved the boss of the largest underground empire in the East. She did not know that Dominic Vaughn, the man beside her, had never owed his life to anyone in 18 years of ruling, until tonight. He looked at her, rain sliding over his face, and tried to open his mouth to say something. But at that moment, another sound cut through the rain, the sound of a car engine, far away, but coming closer. Someone was coming back, and Dominic Vaughn's trail of blood led straight to where they were lying. The engine noise drew closer and closer. Alara did not need to think. 5 years of surviving in the woods had taught her to act immediately. She lunged up, grabbed the arm of the unfamiliar man, and started dragging him toward the trees. But his hand clamped around her wrist, so strong it startled her into stopping. Stop. Listen first. His voice was rough with pain, yet it carried an authority she had never heard in her life. She turned to look at him, ready to argue. They did not have time. The one who had shoved him into the ravine was coming back, but his eyes silenced her. That was not the look of someone who had just nearly died. It was the look of someone calculating, analyzing, controlling the situation even while lying in mud with blood soaking half his face. He tilted his head and listened. One vehicle, not a convoy. Maybe only one person came back to check. Alara blinked. He was right. She could hear only one engine, head southeast. He went on, still strangely calm. The wind is blowing from the west. If they brought hunting dogs, that direction will cover our scent. She stared at him as if he had grown another head. This man had just fallen into a ravine, had just nearly died, bones possibly broken, blood pouring, and he was still breaking down tactics like a general on a battlefield. Who was he? But she had no time to ask. The engine had stopped, which meant the vehicle had arrived. She nodded quickly, slid her shoulder under his arm, and hauled him up. He clenched his teeth, a groan of pain breaking from his throat as his weight hit his left leg. A broken bone. She knew it at once. But he did not scream, did not complain. He only leaned on her and moved. They disappeared into the forest to the southeast, leaving behind the rain and the darkness swallowing the blood at the cliff's edge. On the cliffs of Blackwood Ravine, the vehicle stopped in the same place as before. Marcus Thorne stepped out, unhurried. He had won. He had returned only to confirm his victory, to see with his own eyes the body of Dominic Vaughn at the bottom of the ravine. Maybe he would take a photograph. Proof. A keepsake. He took a flashlight from the vehicle, walked to the edge, and aimed it down into the black. The beam swept across the rock face, over broken branches, over sharp outcrops. No body. Marcus blinked. He adjusted the light and searched again. Still nothing. He saw the old limb where Dominic had been caught, snapped halfway, hanging loose. He saw blood on the rock, blotched under the beam. But there was no body. Impossible, he whispered, his voice trembling with anger and with fear. He swept the light over the ground near the edge, and he saw it. Drag marks, mud torn up, blood. A trail of blood leading straight into the forest. Someone had saved Dominic. Someone had pulled him away. Fury flared in Marcus's chest like fire. He wanted to rush into the woods at once, to find Dominic and finish what he had started. But he stopped. The Blackwood forest at night was a deadly maze. No light, no path, packed with cliffs and sinkholes. And Dominic, even wounded, was still Dominic. 18 years ruling the underworld had not come from luck. If Marcus chased alone into the dark, he might be the one who never came out. He is badly injured, Marcus told himself. Lost a lot of blood. He cannot have gone far. Searching at first light will be easier. With men. With dogs. With weapons. He pulled out his phone and dialed. The other end answered after 2 rings. Change of plans. Marcus's voice was cold as steel. He is alive. Someone took him. Gather the men. But quietly. Only our people. I do not want the whole organization knowing he might still be breathing. He ended the call and looked into the dark forest one last time. Somewhere in those trees, Dominic Vaughn was bleeding, in pain, waiting to die. And Marcus would make sure that this time, he died for real. Marcus wanted it kept secret. He wanted to end it with his own hands. No witnesses, no traces. That arrogance would be his first mistake. They moved through the night, but so slowly Alara could count every single step. The Blackwood Forest after dark was a maze of shadow and danger, but she knew it the way she knew the lines of her own palm. 5 years living here had taught her every tree root, every split in the rock, every narrow track the wild animals used. Dominic leaned on her shoulder, one hand gripping a thick branch as a walking stick. His left leg was broken. She was certain of it from the way his face tightened every time he put weight on it. But he did not cry out. Not a single groan, not a single complaint. Only the hard drag of his breathing and the sound of teeth grinding as he held the pain in. Every 15 to 20 minutes, they had to stop and rest. Dominic would press his back to a tree trunk, eyes squeezed shut, sweat pouring out to mix with the rain on his face. Alara stood guard, listening for every sound in the woods. No barking dogs, no men following, at least not yet. 2 miles of forest trail would normally take her less than an hour. Tonight, with a badly injured man leaning against her, it took them almost 5. When the first threads of dawn began to slip through the canopy, they were still a long way from her cabin. During one of their stops, Dominic spoke. You know this forest. His voice was low and exhausted, but it still carried a sharp, watchful edge. Rabbit traps, animal paths, old footprints in the dirt. You live here. Alara did not answer. She only gave a small nod, her eyes still fixed ahead. How long? He asked again. Alone. Silence. She did not speak. She did not want to speak. And he, unlike what she had imagined a powerful man like him would be, did not push. He only nodded once, as if her silence was an answer too, then forced himself up to keep moving. She did not know that Dominic Vaughn had read more than she thought. He saw the loneliness in her eyes. He saw old pain in the way she dodged his gaze, and he saw strength in the narrow shoulders, carrying the weight of a man twice her size. This girl had a story, and he wanted to know it. But not now. Now, he needed to survive first. Dozens of miles away, inside the Grand Vaughn estate, Marcus Thorne walked into the conference room at 3 a.m. 8 men were already waiting, all of them people he had carefully chosen over the years. Not Dominic's men, his. Kozlov ambushed us, Marcus began, his voice trembling just enough to sound like grief. Dominic fell into the ravine. I tried to save him, but I was too late. He paused and drew a breath as if holding back emotion. But when I went back, his body was gone. Someone took it. Maybe Kozlov wants proof. The 8 men stayed silent, nodding, no one asking questions. They knew what to do. In the corner of the room, one man stood quietly watching. Roman Bellucci, 40 years old, salt and pepper hair, a face so expressionless it looked carved from stone. He was one of Dominic Vaughn's most loyal men, had followed his boss from the earliest days, and he recognized the wrongness immediately. Marcus had summoned only Marcus's people. No one from Dominic's inner circle had been called in. Not him, not the men who had stood beside Dominic for 18 years. Why? Roman kept his face blank and nodded when Marcus looked his way. He would not ask. He would not object. He would pretend to believe every word Marcus said. But inside his mind, the pieces were sliding into place. Dominic Vaughn was not the kind of man who simply fell into a ravine. In 18 years ruling the underworld, his boss had survived dozens of ambushes, dozens of assassination attempts, and now a peace negotiation was what killed him. No, something was wrong, and Marcus was moving too fast, too sure of himself, as if this was something he had planned long before. Roman Bellucci stood in the corner, watching Marcus give orders. Something was wrong. Dominic would not go down that easily, and Marcus was acting too hurried, too confident, like a man who had already planned every step. The first light of dawn had only just brushed the treetops when Alara's small cabin came into view. She could barely stay on her feet, her legs trembling after nearly 5 hours of supporting a man twice her weight through dense forest. Dominic was no better. His face drained pale from blood loss, every step its own kind of torture. She shoved open the old wooden door, pulled him inside, and lowered him to the floor near the fireplace, long gone cold. Then she sank down beside him, gasping, soaked through with sweat and rain. Dominic lay there with his back against the wooden wall and began to watch. Even with pain blurring his vision in waves, the instinct of a man who had lived on vigilance for 18 years would not let him stop analyzing. The cabin was small and poor, just one room with a narrow bed, a wooden table, and a few shelves. But something caught his attention. Order, animal traps stacked neatly in the corner, one by one, arranged by size from smallest to largest. Rope coiled cleanly on a hook, not a single strand tangled. Knives sharpened so finely their blades caught the weak light from the window. Dried herbs hung in bundles from the rafters, clearly sorted. This was not the tidiness of an ordinary woman. This was military order. Discipline. The kind of structure built by someone who had turned survival into an art. She lives alone, Dominic thought. But she does not live like a victim. She lives like a soldier. Curiosity began to stir in him about this girl. Who was she? Why was she here, alone, in the middle of this wild, empty forest? Alara did not give him time to ask. She stood, pulled a wooden box from beneath the bed, and opened it. Inside were medical supplies, gauze, and jars of dried herbs he did not recognize. She knelt beside him and went to work. She cut his pant leg to expose his left leg, swollen and bruised deep purple. Without a word, she took 2 pieces of wood she had already prepared and began to splint it in place. Her hands moved fast, precise, without a flicker of hesitation. She cleaned the wound on his head with fresh water, pressed a sharp-smelling herbal paste onto the cut, then wrapped it neatly. Dominic watched her hands as they worked. These were not the hands of an amateur. These were trained hands. "You are trained," he said, his voice rough. "Medical school." Alara paused for a second. Only a second. Then she kept rapping, not answering, not looking at him. But in that brief moment, Dominic saw something pass through her eyes. Pain. Not physical pain, but something deeper, older, like a wound that had healed yet still ached whenever the weather changed. Alara looked down at her hands. An old scar ran across the center of her right palm, long and pale, stark against calloused skin. A memory surged up without warning. A seatbelt slicing into flesh, blood soaking her hand. She was pulling, trying to drag someone out of a car that was sinking, water rising. And then, she clenched her hand, forcing the memory back into the dark where it belonged. Not now, not here. She stood, turned her back to Dominic, and pretended to busy herself putting the medical box away. Dominic did not ask again. He knew when silence was the wiser choice. Instead, his gaze wandered around the cabin and stopped at a photograph on the wall. A family of 4, father, mother, a teenage girl he recognized as Alara from years ago, and a boy around 8 or 9 with a bright, open smile. They stood in front of a park, all of them wearing running shirts, and on the boy's shirt was a logo Dominic recognized instantly. Vaughn Memorial Hospital, charity run. The hospital his family funded. The charity run his father had started more than 10 years ago. Dominic looked at Alara, then back at the photo. The girl in the picture was smiling, eyes shining with happiness, completely unlike the quiet, guarded woman standing before him now. What happened? Where was her family? And why would a family that once took part in an event tied to the Vaughn Hospital have a daughter living alone deep in the woods like this? Coincidence? Or was there a connection he did not yet see? The photograph stared back at him. A happy family, a familiar logo, and a question that would haunt him for the next 24 hours. Who is she, really? Night slowly settled over the small cabin, bringing a cold that seeped into every seam of the timber. Alara had built a fire in the hearth, and the flickering light threw ghost shapes dancing across the walls. She sat on the wooden floor with her back against the bed frame, her eyes never leaving the man lying motionless near the fire. Dominic had slipped into delirium since late afternoon, his body burning with fever, sweat soaking his forehead even though the air had turned sharp and chilly. The wound on his head had stopped bleeding thanks to her herbs, but he had lost far too much blood the night before. She had done everything she could. Now there was only waiting and watching. Around midnight he began to talk in his sleep. At first it was only meaningless murmurs, but then a name broke from his lips, pained and bitter. "Marcus." "Why?" Alara straightened, listening. "I trusted you." His voice cracked, like a child betrayed by the very person he loved most. "Marcus, brother." Why? She did not know who Marcus was. She knew nothing about the man in front of her except that someone had shoved him into a ravine, but she understood the pain in that voice. She understood what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. She understood all too well. Near dawn, Dominic suddenly opened his eyes. The fever had eased, and though his gaze was exhausted, it was clear again. He saw Ilara sitting there, watching him. Firelight reflected in her eyes like two small candles. Silence stretched between them. No one spoke, only the soft crackle of the flames and the wind whistling beyond the window. Then Dominic spoke, his voice rough but steady. "The man who pushed me." He held her gaze. "His name is Marcus, my cousin. I raised him like a brother." Ilara did not react, only listened. 15 years, Dominic went on, and for the first time since she met him, she saw something other than icy calm in his eyes. She saw pain. 15 years, I trusted him, protected him, gave him everything. He paused, drew a deep breath, and he pushed me off a cliff. It was the first time he had admitted that betrayal to anyone. Not to his men, not to his allies, but to a stranger who lived in the woods, the one who had saved his life without knowing who he was. Maybe it was precisely because she did not know who he was that he could say it out loud. Ilara looked at him. In her eyes, Dominic did not see curiosity or judgment. He saw understanding, quiet and deep, as if she knew exactly what that kind of wound felt like. Slowly, she lifted a hand and pressed it to her chest, right over her heart. Then she pointed to him. Without a word, the gesture said everything. "I understand. I understand this pain. I have been there too." Dominic looked at her, and something shifted in his eyes. 20 miles away, the town of Hollow Creek woke in fear. 2 glossy black vehicles sat in the center of the small square, and 6 men in black suits stepped out with cold faces. Marcus's men. They went from house to house, knocking, asking the same question. "Who lives near Blackwood? Who was outside last night?" The villagers shook their heads in terror. They knew nothing. They saw nothing. They only wanted these men to leave and let them be. In the small bar at the edge of town, Earl Brody stood in a corner, watching it all unfold. 50 years old, thin, eyes hollow from sleeplessness and too much liquor. Earl owed money everywhere, from rent to gambling debts. He was waiting for the day he would be thrown out of his collapsing shack. "Valuable information will be rewarded generously," one of the men in the black suit announced, holding up a thick stack of cash. Earl stared at that money. Enough to pay every debt, enough to live easy for a few months, enough to buy more liquor until he forgot the life he had failed to build. He knew about Ghost Girl, the girl who lived alone in the Blackwood forest. He had seen her many times while hunting, sliding through the trees like a real specter. She did not hurt anyone. She did not speak to anyone. She only wanted to be left alone. But that money... Earl wrestled with himself for a few seconds. Then he stepped forward. "There is a girl," he said, his voice trembling with guilt and greed. "Lives alone near Blackwood. Folks call her the Ghost Girl. She knows that forest better than anyone." The man in the black suit turned, his eyes brightening. "Where exactly?" "I can take you there." Earl swallowed hard. "For the right price." Inside the cabin, trust was beginning to take shape. In the town, it had just been sold for 30 pieces of silver. That afternoon, Dominic's fever spiked. Ilara laid her hand on his forehead and flinched at the heat. His skin was dry and scorching, his lips cracked, his body shaking in waves he could not control. The wound on his head had begun to infect, a red rim spreading around the cut, pus gathering beneath the bandage. She needed antibiotics. She needed the kind of medicine the forest could not replace. But she did not have it. She had nothing except what nature offered, and nature could not heal blood infection. Ilara panicked. She changed the bandage, packed on more herbs, wiped the sweat from his face, but nothing helped. The fever kept climbing, and he slipped into delirium. "Don't," Dominic murmured, his head rocking back and forth on the wooden floor. "Don't leave me, Marcus." His voice sounded like a child begging. Nothing like the cold, controlled man she had seen. In fever, every layer of armor fell away, revealing the raw hurt underneath. "Please, I trusted you, brother." Ilara knelt beside him, not knowing what to do. She watched his face twist with pain, his eyes squeezed shut, his eyelids twitching as if he were trapped in a nightmare. And then she saw it. In the moment the firelight touched his face, she no longer saw a stranger. She saw her little brother, Ethan, 8 years old, the same fear in the eyes, the same desperate call. Memory crashed over her like a tidal wave, drowning her without mercy. Water rising, black and freezing, rising to her throat, her chin, her nose. Her brother stared at her, eyes wide with terror, mouth open to call her name, but no sound came out. Only bubbles, the last bubbles of air, and then the water swallowed him. Alara trembled, tears sliding down her cheeks without her even realizing it. For 5 years she had tried to bury that memory. For 5 years she had run into silence so she would not have to hear that cry again inside her head. But tonight, watching this stranger writhe in fever, it all came back. "Don't leave." Dominic groaned again. "Please." Alara did not think. She took his hand and held it tight, as if she were trying to keep a soul from slipping out of this world. And then she did what she had not done in 5 years. She spoke. "Stay." Just one word. Her voice was rough, breaking apart, like wind moving through dead leaves. After 5 years unused, her throat had forgotten how to make sound, but she forced it to work. "Don't leave. I'm here." The words came out like a whisper from the grave, but they were real. For the first time in 5 years, Alara Sinclair had spoken, and unbelievably, Dominic opened his eyes. They were still clouded by fever, but they found hers and held on. "You spoke," he whispered, weak but amazed. Alara shocked herself. She lifted a hand to her throat, as if she could not believe that sound had come from there. Her tears fell harder, but she did not know what she was crying for. For him, for her brother, for 5 years of silence shattered by a stranger. Dominic weakly squeezed her hand tighter. "Say it again." Alara swallowed, her throat burning like she was swallowing sand. "My name," she said, word by word, slow and difficult, "is Alara." Dominic looked at her, and even standing on the line between life and death, he smiled, a small smile, faint, but real. "Alara," he repeated her name as if it were the most beautiful word he had ever heard. 2 miles away, at the edge of the Blackwood Forest, Earl Brody stopped and pointed ahead. "About 2 miles that way," he told the 6 men in black suits behind him. "There's a small cabin. She lives alone, doesn't talk to anyone." One of them, the leader, shoved a thick stack of cash into Earl's hand. "Get lost, and if anyone asks, you didn't see us." Earl took the money, lowered his head, and vanished into the woods like a rat fleeing a cat. He did not look back. He did not want to know what would happen next. The 6 men checked their weapons. Handguns, daggers, rope. Marcus said quiet and clean. The leader said, his voice cold as ice, "No witnesses. The girl dies too." They started moving into the forest, their footsteps making almost no sound. 2 miles. In less than 2 hours they would be there. Alara had broken 5 years of silence with a single word, "Stay." But the men coming through the forest carried a different word in their minds, "Kill." The next morning, Dominic's fever finally broke. Alara's herbs, and the resilience of a man who had survived countless assassination attempts, had won. He woke with a much clearer mind, even though his body was still weak and his legs still throbbed with brutal pain. The cabin was silent. He looked around and did not see Alara. Through the small window, he saw her shape outside, sitting beside a small fire, stirring something in a pot. Making porridge for him, perhaps. Dominic lay there for a moment, staring up at the old wooden ceiling. Alara. She had saved his life. She had broken 5 years of silence because of him. Who was she? The instincts of a Mafia boss would not let him lie still when there were too many unanswered questions. He forced himself upright, gritting his teeth against the pain from the broken leg, and began to study the small cabin more closely. On the wooden shelf near the bed, he saw old medical textbooks, their spines worn but still readable. Anatomy, physiology, basic surgery. Beside them were old surgical instruments, wrapped in clean cloth and arranged neatly. He reached for a torn piece of paper, fitted the scraps together until it took shape. A student certificate, Alara Sinclair, medical school. The rest was ripped away, but it was enough for him to understand. She had once been a medical student. She had once had a different life before she came to live here. His gaze settled on an old wooden box on the high shelf, the one he had noticed the first time he arrived but had not had the chance to examine. He reached up, brought it down, and lifted the lid. Inside were documents, newspaper clippings, and photographs. He picked up the top clipping, and his heart missed a beat. Sinclair Creek Bridge collapse. Family of 4, 3 dead, 1 survivor. 5 years ago. He read on, line by line, and with every sentence the truth came down like a hammer to his chest. Sinclair Creek Bridge. A family of 4 driving across the bridge on a stormy night. The bridge collapsed. The car fell into the river. 3 dead. Thomas Sinclair, Sarah Sinclair, and Ethan Sinclair, 8 years old. 1 survivor, Alara Sinclair, 22. The last detail froze Dominic in place. The bridge was on Vaughn Corporation land. According to the engineering report, The bridge had shown signs of severe structural damage 2 years earlier, but was not repaired. Vaughn Corporation. His family. Dominic remembered. 5 years ago, his father was still alive, still in control of everything. He remembered that meeting, when someone mentioned an old bridge that needed repairs in rural West Virginia. And he remembered his father's answer. It's just a bridge in the middle of nowhere. No one important uses it. Delay the repairs. Delay the repairs. Save the cost. No one important uses it. That bridge had killed Ilara's family. His father. His family. They had indirectly killed her parents and her brother. Dominic's hands began to shake, not from fever, not from physical pain, but from guilt. He had seen death all his life. He had caused plenty of it. That was the nature of the world he lived in. But this was different. This was not death from conflict, from power wars. This was death from indifference, from greed, from a careless decision made by a wealthy man sitting in an air-conditioned office, who never knew the faces of the people living in the middle of nowhere. And the girl who had saved his life, the girl who had broken 5 years of silence for him, was the victim of his family. The cabin door opened. Ilara stepped in with a bowl of hot porridge in her hands. She saw him sitting up, his face drained pale, and worry surfaced in her eyes. "You look pale," she said, her voice still hoarse and unfamiliar with being used. "What's wrong?" Dominic quickly set the wooden box down beside him, covered it with the blanket. "Nothing," he said, so calm he hated himself for it. "Just the fever." Ilara studied him for a moment, as if she did not fully believe him, but she did not press. She only set the bowl down beside him and turned to go back outside. Dominic watched her shape move away, and for the first time in 18 years, he felt something he thought he had forgotten a long time ago. He felt guilt. He had killed without blinking, but this lie, hiding the truth from the woman who had saved his life, felt like swallowing broken glass. Ilara came back into the cabin with a bowl of hot porridge, steam curling up from its surface. She sat down beside Dominic, handed him the bowl, and tried to shape each word as if she were learning how to use her own voice again. "Eat. You need strength." Her voice was still rough and awkward, but every word was a small victory over 5 years of silence. Dominic took the bowl, but his eyes did not leave her. He looked at her differently now. No longer the gaze of a man looking at the person who saved his life. This was the gaze of a sinner looking at a victim. Every line of her face, every scar on her hands, every shadow in her eyes now carried a different meaning. His family had caused all of it. His family had turned a young woman with a future into a ghost, living deep in the woods. He lifted a spoonful of porridge to his mouth, but everything tasted like sand. Guilt lodged in his throat, making every swallow hard. His eyes drifted to the family photograph on the wall, and before he could stop himself, he asked, "The photo, your family." Ilara followed his gaze to the picture. Her expression did not change, but Dominic saw her shoulders stiffen slightly. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Then she spoke, her voice like dry leaves crumbling. "Accident. 5 years ago." She swallowed, still looking at the photograph. "Bridge collapsed. They drowned." A deep breath. "I survived. They didn't." She did not give details. She did not speak of how she had tried to pull her brother from the car. She did not speak of how she had to let go. She was not ready for that. Maybe she never would be. Dominic heard every word like a blade across his heart. He knew more than she had said. He knew that bridge belonged to his family. He knew his father had signed the order to delay repairs. He knew his family's indifference had killed 3 people and ruined the life of the 4th. He wanted to speak. He wanted to confess. "Ilara, my family owns that bridge. My father knew it was failing and did not fix it. My family killed your family." But he looked at her. She had only just started speaking again after 5 years. She had only just started trusting him. She had only just opened a door she had kept locked for so long. If he told the truth now, he would destroy everything. That door would slam shut, and this time it might never open again. He could not do that. Not yet. "I'm sorry," Dominic said, his voice catching. 2 simple words, but carrying far more meaning than she understood. Sorry for her loss. Sorry for what his family had done. Sorry that he was hiding the truth. Sorry for all of it. Ilara looked at him, perhaps sensing something in his voice, but she did not ask. She only gave a small nod and turned away. Dominic watched her, and in his mind a decision took shape. When he got out of here, when he dealt with Marcus, he would make it right. He would rebuild that bridge. He would make it up to her, somehow. He would do everything in his power to repay his family's sin. at any cost. But first, he had to survive. Alara was washing the bowl near the door when she suddenly stopped. Her head tilted, her ears, trained to every sound in this forest, stretching to listen. "Listen," she said, her voice tightening. Dominic went still, focusing. At first he heard nothing but wind and leaves. Then, from far away, the sound carried in. Dogs barking. Not one, several. Dominic's mind snapped into motion, the instincts of a Mafia boss who had survived countless hunts. Hunting dogs. At least 2, maybe 3. Half a mile out, moving fast. Alara's eyes widened, fear flickering in the eyes that were usually so calm. "They found us." "How long to pack?" Dominic asked, his voice sharp and focused. 2 minutes. Make it 1. Alara did not need to be told twice. She slammed into the cabin like a storm, grabbed the backpack she had kept ready, and stuffed in more herbs, bandages, a knife, and a coil of rope. This was why she lived like a soldier, everything prepared for the worst. Dominic forced himself up, jaw clenched against the ripping pain in his broken leg. He grabbed the thick branch he used as a crutch, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. The barking grew closer. Alara swung the backpack over her shoulder, ran to him, and slipped her shoulder beneath his arm. They had no time to say goodbye to the little cabin that had been her home for 5 years. They only had time to run. The barking grew louder. Alara yanked the pack into place. Dominic forced himself upright, ignoring the scream of pain from his broken leg. They had minutes, maybe less. Alara led Dominic out the back door of the cabin, where a narrow footpath sank deeper into the blackwood forest. The barking echoed behind them, drawing closer with every breath, pressing them to move faster. But Dominic could not go any faster. His broken leg, even splinted, still flared with vicious pain at every step. He leaned on the stick, jaw clenched, forcing himself forward, while Alara carried one side of his weight at the shoulder. Alara whispered, urgent but low, "There is a path through the ravine, harder to track." Dominic nodded. He did not know this forest, but she did. She had lived here for 5 years, memorized every route, every crack and stone. If she said there was a way through, he trusted her. They pushed through dense brush, over moss-slick boulders that threatened to slide out from underfoot. Alara guided them with the certainty of someone who had walked this route hundreds of times, steering around deep pockets of mud and roots that could send them sprawling. But Dominic noticed something changing in her as they went deeper. Her shoulders tightened, her pace slowed, and when the sound of running water began to reach them, she stopped completely. He followed her gaze. Ahead, through the trees, he could see light flashing on moving water. The Blackwood River, the route she had chosen, required them to cross. Alara stood rigid, her face draining of color, eyes fixed on the river the way a person looks at the mouth of a beast. Dominic understood at once. Her family had drowned, the bridge collapsed, the car fell into the water. She had been forced to watch them sink while she could not save a single one. The current had taken everything she loved. "You are afraid of the water," he said, not as a question, but as a plain truth. Alara did not answer. She only swallowed, tightened her grip on the strap of the pack on her shoulder, and kept moving. She did not deny it. She did not explain. She met her fear in silence and walked straight toward it. Dominic did not force her to speak, but he remembered. Dozens of miles away, inside the quiet Vaughn estate, Roman Bellucci was conducting his own investigation. He waited until Marcus and his men left, then slipped into the trader's office. Marcus had been in such a hurry that he had forgotten his personal phone on the desk. A fatal mistake. Roman unlocked it, scrolled through messages, and what he found made his blood boil with rage. Messages with Viktor Kozlov. Not from last week, not from last month. From 3 months ago, they had planned everything. The fake peace negotiation, the location on the cliff, the moment Marcus would shove Dominic when no one was watching. This was not an ambush. This was betrayal, mapped out in advance. Roman squeezed the phone so hard the casing creaked in his grip. 18 years at Dominic Vaughn's side. 18 years of absolute loyalty. And Marcus, the one Dominic had raised like a brother, had sold his boss to an enemy. Roman pulled out his own phone and called the 4 men he trusted most, the ones who had followed Dominic from the very beginning. He gave the order in clipped words. "Gather up, quietly. Do not let Marcus know. The boss might still be alive." Roman knew something Marcus did not. 20 years earlier, he had built a secret safe house with Dominic's father at Miller's Ridge, about 10 miles east of Blackwood Ravine. If Dominic was alive and running, instinct would pull him there. Roman told his team, "Track Marcus's men. They will lead us to the boss. He moved out, but he did not move ahead. He stayed behind, watching from a distance, waiting for the right moment. In the Blackwood forest, Alara and Dominic finally reached the riverbank. The water ran hard after the storm, muddy and violent, carrying branches and rotted leaves in its grip. The roar of it sounded like a starving creature. Alara stopped at the edge, her face white as paper. Her eyes locked on the current, but Dominic knew she was not truly seeing the river in front of her. She was seeing another river. 5 years ago. A stormy night. A car sinking, inch by inch. The people she loved disappearing beneath black water. Dominic called softly, "Alara, we need to cross." She did not respond. She stood like a statue, frozen inside her own fear. Behind them, the barking grew closer. Ahead, the river thundered, and Alara stood between two hells, unable to go forward, unable to go back, staring into the water that had taken everything from her. Alara stood frozen before the river like a statue carved from stone. The dogs were barking closer and closer. Men were shouting through the trees, but she did not hear any of it. She heard only water, the water roaring in front of her, the water inside her memory, the water that had swallowed everything she loved. "Alara," Dominic called, but she did not react. "Alara, look at me." She still stood there, eyes fixed on the current, yet not truly seeing it. She was staring into the past. 5 years ago, a stormy night like tonight. Her family was driving home after a school celebration for Ethan. Her father at the wheel, her mother in the passenger seat, and she and her little brother in the back. Ethan was 8 years old, still wearing the charity-run medal around his neck, chattering about how he would grow up to become a doctor, just like his sister. Then the bridge collapsed. No warning sound, no sign at all, only the sensation of the ground vanishing beneath the tires, and then they fell. The car plunged into the river with screaming metal and exploding glass. Water rushed in at once, black and freezing. Alara looked toward the front seat. Her parents did not move, their heads slumped forward, blood smeared across the shattered windshield. They died the moment of impact. She did not have time to cry. The water was rising. She forced the door, got out, then turned back for her brother. Ethan was trapped in his seatbelt, small hands clawing helplessly at the metal latch. The water had reached his throat. "Alara," he screamed, eyes wide with terror. "Don't let go, please." She dove down, hands fighting the seatbelt clasp. It was jammed solid. She pulled, yanked, twisted. The belt sliced into her palm, blood blooming and mixing with the black water. It would not open. The water rose to Ethan's chin, to his lips, to his nose. He stared at her, pleading, mouth open to say her name, but only bubbles escaped. Alara pulled harder. Her lungs burned for air, her head spun. She had to choose, die with him, or let go. She let go. She saw her brother's eyes one last time before darkness swallowed him. Those eyes did not accuse her. They were only afraid, and then they closed forever. Alara broke the surface, gasping, alive, alone. From that night on, she stopped speaking. Not because she could not, because she did not feel she deserved to. Her brother had gone silent forever beneath black water. She had no right to use her voice when he no longer could. "Alara." Dominic's voice yanked her back into the present. She blinked and saw him standing in front of her, his hands gripping her shoulders, his eyes locked on hers. "Whatever happened in that water," he said, his voice firm and strong, "it wasn't your fault." Alara trembled, tears running down her cheeks without her realizing it. "You don't know. I know you saved me," Dominic cut her off. "I know you didn't let go when you could have. That's who you are now. That's who matters." The dogs were very close now. Maybe only minutes before they reached them. Alara looked at Dominic, then at the river. The river had taken everything from her. The river had turned her into a ghost, but if she did not cross, she would die. And the man she had saved would die too. She drew a deep breath, deep enough to make her lungs ache. "Hold on to me," she said, her voice shaking but resolved. "Don't let go." Dominic gripped her hand tight. "I won't." They stepped into the water, cold enough that Alara almost screamed. The current slammed into them like a string of punches, rising to their knees, to their hips, to their chests. Alara nearly went down when a hard surge hit her, but Dominic held her, his arm around her waist like an anchor line. Panic clawed at her. Memory surged back. Black water. Ethan. Eyes closing. But Dominic's hand held fast. He did not let go, just as he had promised. Step by step, they moved forward. The river tried to drag them under, but they would not let it win. At last they reached the far bank and collapsed into mud, gasping, shaking with cold and exhaustion. Alara lay there, staring up at the gray sky, and realized she was still alive. She had crossed the river. She had faced the greatest fear of her life, and she had not drowned. From the far side of the river, a shout rang out. They crossed. Go around. They were across, but the chase was not over. She had faced the water that haunted her nightmares. And for the first time in 5 years, she did not sink. They had no time to rest. The moment the pursuer's shout carried from the far bank, Alara hauled Dominic up and forced him to move. Their clothes clung to them, soaked through and freezing, but she barely noticed. She only knew they had to run. They pushed as fast as they could through the thick forest, but Dominic was fading. The river crossing had torn his head wound open again, blood sliding down and mixing with the water, staining his collar a dark, spreading red. His broken leg, after being plunged into icy current and battered under pressure, now screamed with twice the pain. Every step was torment. Alara saw it clearly. He could not keep going like this. She stopped behind a large cut of stone, a narrow, rocky passage where they could hide from any eyes chasing them, at least for a moment. Sit, she said, short and firm, pressing him down onto a flat rock. She opened her pack, pulled out gauze and what herbs she had left, and quickly rewrapped the wound on his head. Her hands shook from the cold, yet they still moved with the clean precision of someone trained. The distance to the safe house was about 3 miles, according to what Dominic had told her. Only 3 miles more, but in his condition, 3 miles could be a whole world. As she worked, Dominic watched her. Her face was focused, severe, but he could see where tears had dried on her cheeks. She had faced the greatest fear of her life for him. She had crossed the river that had killed her family for him. "Why did you save me?" he asked, his voice rough. "You could have walked away. That night on the cliff, you could have acted like you saw nothing." Alara stopped, looking at him. Silence held for a long time, as if she were searching for language for something she had never dared to say out loud. "Because I know what it feels like to be left behind," she said, barely above a whisper. The quiet wrapped around them again, with only wind threading through stone and leaves whispering overhead. Then Alara spoke again, and Dominic knew this was the first time she had ever given these words to anyone. "My brother. I let him go. In the water." Her voice broke. "I couldn't hold on." Dominic's chest tightened, not only because of what she had endured, but because he knew the truth she did not. That bridge belonged to his family. His father had ordered it left unrepaired. His family had indirectly taken her brother, her parents, and the life she might have lived. "You did what you had to do to survive," he said, his voice catching. "No one could have done more." Alara shook her head, a bitter, quiet smile crossing her mouth. "That's what I tell myself. Every night. It doesn't help." Dominic wanted to tell her the truth. He wanted to confess, right then, that his family carried responsibility for her tragedy. But they were running. They were being hunted. And if he said it now, she might leave him here. He would die, and the truth would die with him. No, he had to live. He had to live to make it right, to repay, to rebuild that bridge, and everything his family's indifference had destroyed. Still, the guilt ate at him from the inside, like acid poured into the soul. A few miles away, Roman Bellucci shadowed Marcus's men from a distance. He kept a safe gap, moving like a ghost beneath the branches. They were heading toward Miller's Ridge, exactly as he had predicted. The old safe house, the place he and Dominic's father had built 20 years ago. Roman pulled out his phone and called his people. "Safe house. Be there in 2 hours. Stay hidden until I give the signal." Somewhere else, Marcus received a message from one of his men. "They are heading to Miller's Ridge." Marcus smiled, a smile cold as ice. The old safe house. Of course. He told his driver to take him there. He wanted to see Dominic's face when he finished this with his own hands. In the forest, Alara and Dominic kept moving. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of fighting terrain and wounds, a cabin appeared ahead, tucked among ancient oaks. "Is that it?" Alara asked. Dominic nodded, relief loosening something in him. "Yes, we made it." But Alara did not move. She stood still, head tilted, listening. Everything was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels skittering along branches, no sound of life at all. "Wait," she said, tension tightening her voice. "Something's wrong." Dominic asked what she meant. "It's too quiet," she said. "No birds." And then, from the darkness around the cabin, figures stepped out. 6 men, armed, and among them, wearing triumph like a second skin, Marcus Thorne stood with a victorious smile on his lips. "Hello, cousin," he said, his voice like venom. "You're harder to kill than I thought. The safe house should have been shelter. Instead, it had become the perfect trap." Marcus stepped out of the darkness with the smile of a victor, 6 armed men behind him, their guns loaded and ready to fire. They fanned out in a clean circle, sealing every exit. Dominic shoved Alara behind him. Even with his broken leg screaming so hard his vision blurred, he stood tall. It was the posture of a Mafia boss, even when death was staring him in the face. Marcus studied the scene with open satisfaction. He had brought only 6 men, not because he lacked more, but because he wanted secrecy. The fewer people who knew Dominic was still alive, the better. If the rumor spread, the men loyal to Dominic might rise up. And besides, Marcus was confident. Dominic was badly injured, leg broken, blood lost, with only a small girl at his side. It did not take an army to kill a man already halfway to the grave. 15 years, Marcus began, his voice thick with bitterness stored up over time. 15 years I stood in your shadow. 15 years of yes, Dominic. Of course, Dominic. I was your dog, waiting for scraps from your table. Dominic stared at the cousin he had raised like a brother and saw a stranger. "I trusted you," he said, his voice low, more sorrow than rage. "You were family." Marcus threw his head back and laughed, the sound echoing through the silent woods. "Family. I was your servant with a fancier title. You fed me crumbs and called it generosity. You patted my head and called it respect. But I was never your equal. I was never anything more than Marcus, the loyal cousin who does whatever Dominic wants. I would have given you everything," Dominic said. "You just had to ask." "Ask," Marcus roared. "Ask. I should not have to ask for what is rightfully mine. I earned it. Every drop of blood I spilled was for your empire. Every bullet I took was for your name. And what did I get? A pat on the back and a seat at the children's table." He stopped, drew a breath, then his eyes slid to Alara behind Dominic. "And who is this?" He stepped closer, tilting his head as if examining a curious object. "Your little guardian angel." Alara did not retreat. She stood still, eyes fixed on Marcus, unblinking, unmoving. 5 years alone in the woods had taught her how to face danger without showing fear. Marcus halted in front of her, surprised. "Pretty, brave, stupid," he judged, lifting a hand as if to touch her face. "She does not even flinch. I like her." He turned to Dominic with a cruel smile. "Shame she has to die." "Leave her out of this," Dominic thundered. "She has nothing to do with our business." Marcus shook his head, performing regret. "She is a witness, cousin. And you know the rule. Your rule, remember, no witnesses." He raised his gun and aimed at Dominic. "How many have died because of that rule? How many innocent people were erased because they saw too much? Now your rule is going to kill you." He pulled the gun's trigger back, cold metal clicking in the still air. "Any last words?" Dominic looked into Marcus's eyes, the eyes of the boy he once loved like a brother, and saw nothing but hatred and ambition. "You will never be me, Marcus," he said calmly. "Even if you kill me, you will never be me. The men will never respect you the way they respected me, because respect is not taken, it is earned." Marcus ground his teeth, finger tightening on the trigger. "We will see about that." He was about to fire. Then a gunshot exploded from behind. One of Marcus's men crumpled, blood bursting from his chest. Then a second shot, a third. Chaos ignited. From the trees, 5 figures emerged, guns up, turning the circle back onto Marcus's men. And leading them was Roman Bellucci, face hard as ice, eyes burning with loyalty. "Drop your weapons," Roman roared, his voice like thunder. "Now." Marcus stood there, eyes wide with shock, gun still raised but no longer sure where to aim. He had forgotten the first rule of power. Loyalty cannot be bought with promises. It has to be paid for in blood. The standoff stretched tight as a drawn wire about to snap. 2 groups faced each other with guns leveled, fingers resting on triggers, waiting for one signal to open fire. The air felt so thick, Alara had the strange sensation she was breathing through water. Roman stepped forward 1 pace, his weapon still raised, his voice cold as ice, and he told Marcus it was over. He said they had evidence, the messages with Kozlov, 3 months of planning, and that Marcus had sold out his own blood for power. He threw the phone that belonged to Marcus onto the ground in front of him, and said everything was in there, every message, every deal, every betrayal. Marcus looked down at the phone, then lifted his head, and instead of fear or panic, the way Roman expected, he laughed. The sound was so cold it rang through the silent woods and made even men holding guns shiver. "Evidence," Marcus said. as if the word itself amused him, and he shrugged with a calm that did not belong to a man cornered. He asked if Roman truly thought it mattered, if anyone would care about messages when the one holding power was the winner. His eyes moved, measuring the angles, weighing the distance, taking inventory of how badly he was losing. Roman had more men, better positions, better weapons, and Marcus knew he would not walk away from this. But if he was going down, he would not go down alone. His gaze settled on Alara, and a cruel smile slowly spread across his mouth. "Before I fall," he said, his voice sweet like honey laced with poison, "let me give you a parting gift, sweetheart." Alara watched him with a guarded stare and told him she wanted nothing from him. Marcus answered that she would want this, and his eyes brightened with a savage delight as he spoke about the man she had been protecting, the man she had risked her life to save, the man she had broken 5 years of silence for. Alara said nothing, but a warning chill slid down her spine that had nothing to do with the weather. 5 years ago, Marcus began, letting each word land slowly as if savoring fine wine. Sinclair Creek Bridge. Does that ring any bells? Alara froze, every muscle locking as if someone had poured cement into her veins. Because that name, that bridge, was where she had lost everything. Marcus went on, never taking his eyes off her, describing a family of 4, 3 dead, 1 survivor. And he said that survivor was her, Alara Sinclair, the girl who lived while her family drowned. Her voice came out as a trembling whisper as she asked how he knew. Marcus laughed and said he knew because the bridge belonged to the Vaughn family, Dominic family, and he pointed toward Dominic as he spoke. He said they knew it was rotting. They had reports, engineers warned them, but they did not care enough to fix it. Too expensive, not worth the investment. Alara turned to Dominic, and he stood there with a face gone white. Not from injury, but from something far deeper. "Tell her, cousin," Marcus urged, his pleasure bright and vicious. "Tell her how your father signed the order to delay repairs. Tell her how your family greed killed hers. Tell her how the blood of her parents and her little brother is on your hands." Silence fell, a suffocating silence that seemed to press on the lungs. Alara stared at Dominic, searching his face for denial, needing him to say Marcus was lying, needing him to say it was the invention of a desperate man about to die. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice like a whisper from the grave. Dominic looked at her, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he ever spoke. "Yes," he said, one word, only one, and it shattered everything. "You knew?" she asked again, and her voice began to tremble harder, and Dominic gave her only silence. "Answer me," she screamed, and it was the first time she had screamed since she broke 5 years of silence. "Did you know?" Dominic swallowed, his eyes twisted with pain as if someone were turning a knife in his heart, and he told her he found out last night in the cabin, that he saw the newspaper clippings and the documents, that he was going to tell her. "You knew," Alara said, stepping back as if distance could protect her from betrayal. "You knew, and you said nothing." Dominic begged her to let him explain, but the word explain snapped something inside her. "Explain what?" she shouted, tears spilling down her face. "Explain how your family killed mine. Explain how you looked into my eyes and lied to me. Explain how you let me save your life while knowing you are the reason my family is dead." Marcus stood there, drinking in the scene with a satisfied smile, calling it beautiful, saying she had risked her life to save the man whose family murdered hers, that she broke 5 years of silence for him, and that he had been lying to her face the whole time. Then Marcus turned his venom toward Dominic and said they were not so different, that they both destroyed the people who trusted them, and that the only difference was that he was honest about it. Alara looked at Dominic as if he were a stranger, the man she dragged out of darkness, the man she crossed a murderous river for, the man she broke 5 years of silence to tell one word, "Stay," and now that word felt like ash on her tongue because he had known and still held her hand, still looked into her eyes, still said he was sorry as if it meant anything. In that moment of chaos, when every gaze was locked on Dominic and Alara, Marcus moved. He lunged at the nearest of his own men, ripped the gun from his hand, spun back, and aimed straight at Dominic. "Time to finish this," he said, because the truth had smashed everything open. And inside the wreckage, Marcus saw his chance. Marcus squeezed the trigger. The gunshot cracked through the tension like a blade, but the bullet did not find its target, because in the split second before Marcus could fire, Alara moved. She threw herself at Dominic with a speed she did not know she possessed, both hands slamming into his chest and driving them down to the ground together. The round tore past the spot where Dominic's head had been and buried itself in the tree behind them with a dry, splintering crack. And then hell erupted. Roman fired instantly, his men firing with him. Marcus's soldiers answered. Gunfire hammered without pause, screams and bodies dropping, everything blending into a single, murderous symphony. Bullets hissed over Ilara's head as she lay across Dominic, shielding him with her own body. She grabbed his collar and dragged him toward a large boulder a few yards away. Dominic tried to help by pushing with his good leg, but he was too weak, too drained of blood, and the agony in his broken leg kept washing his vision in and out. At last they reached the boulder and dropped behind it, temporarily safe from the bullets falling like rain. Ilara sat with her back against the rock, gasping, her chest heaving. Dominic lay beside her, staring up at her face with eyes full of pain and questions. "Ilara, why?" he whispered, his voice rough. "Why did you save me, after everything I—" She looked down at him, and Dominic saw her eyes had gone cold as ice. The warmth he had seen when she held his hand through fever was gone. The fragile connection they had built over 2 days was gone. All that remained was the chill of someone betrayed again. "I don't save people just to watch them die," she said, her voice like stone. Even liars. The gunfire still raged around them. Roman and his men were gaining ground, forcing Marcus's people back into defense. One by one they fell until only a few remained. In the chaos, Marcus saw his opening. He bolted into the forest, leaving his men behind, thinking only of saving himself. Roman saw him run. "Cover me," he shouted to his team, and plunged after Marcus into the black of the trees. Footsteps tore through brush, branches snapped, then gunshots. 1, 2, then silence. Ilara and Dominic waited, not knowing who had won. Seconds dragged like hours. Then Roman emerged from the woods, hauling Marcus with him. The traitor was alive, but his leg was soaked in blood. A bullet drilled clean through his calf. He moaned, face twisted, every ounce of arrogance gone. "He'll live," Roman said, throwing Marcus down like a sack of trash. Unfortunately for him, the shootout was over. Marcus's men were dead or surrendered. Dominic had won. But when he turned to Ilara, he knew he had lost something far more important. She stood, brushed dirt from her clothes, and backed away from him. Not a word, not a glance. "Ilara," Dominic called, his voice pleading. "Please, let me explain." She stopped, but she did not turn. "You saved my life in that river," she said, her calm colder than winter. "I saved yours here. We're even. Ilara, please." "Goodbye, Dominic." She started to walk. Dominic tried to rise, but his broken leg would not bear his weight. He collapsed, pain tearing up from the bone into his spine, but he did not care. He only watched her shape moving farther away. "Ilara," he screamed, his voice shattering like glass. She paused, only for a second. Her shoulders tightened slightly, as if his voice had touched something inside her, but she did not turn. She kept walking, and then she vanished into the forest, the way the villagers always called her, like a ghost. Dominic lay there, staring at the empty space where she had disappeared. Roman stepped closer, looking down at his boss with concern. "Boss, should I send someone after her?" Silence stretched. Then Dominic shook his head, his voice hollow as a shell. "No, let her go." But his eyes stayed fixed on the direction she had taken, staring until darkness swallowed everything. She had saved him twice, and both times she had walked away. But this time, the wound she left behind could not be stitched closed with needle and thread. A few hours later, inside the weathered safe house at Miller's Ridge, Marcus Thorne knelt on the wooden floor with his hands bound tight behind his back. The blood from the wound in his leg had stopped thanks to a rough bandage, but his face was still twisted with pain. Around him, Roman's men stood guard, guns ready in their hands. Dominic sat in a wooden chair across from Marcus, but he did not look at the traitor. He stared into nothing, eyes hollow, like a man who had lost his soul. Roman had splinted his leg carefully, but Dominic did not feel the pain. He did not feel anything, only emptiness. Roman stepped forward, his voice low and respectful. "What do you want to do with him, boss?" Dominic stayed silent for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice empty, like a shell tossed onto shore by the tide. "Lock him up. He'll stand trial in front of the families he betrayed." Marcus lifted his head, and despite everything, he laughed. The laugh came out rough and bitter, loaded with contempt. "That's it. No bullet, no torture. The great Dominic Vaughn has gone soft." Dominic finally looked at him, and Marcus saw something in his cousin's eyes that made the laughter die in his throat. Not anger, not hatred, but pure indifference, as if Marcus no longer existed in his world at all. "Death would be mercy," Dominic said, his voice cold as ice. "You'll live long enough to watch everything you wanted crumble. You'll watch as the empire you tried to steal keeps moving without you. You'll rot in a cell, knowing you failed. Knowing you'll always be nothing more than a footnote in history. That's worse than any bullet I could give you. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but Roman had already signaled his men. They hauled Marcus up and dragged him out of the room. Marcus's curses echoed down the hall, then faded into nothing. Roman turned back to Dominic, worry plain on his face. Boss, your leg needs proper medical attention. I've called for a doctor. Leave me. Dominic cut him off, exhausted. Roman hesitated for a beat, then nodded and left, closing the door behind him. Dominic sat alone in the silent room. Candlelight trembled against the walls, throwing ghost shadows that danced around him. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had held hers while they crossed the river, the hands that had kept her from falling when the current hit, the hands that had promised not to let go. And he had not let go, but he had lied. She saved his life, twice. She broke 5 years of silence for him. She faced the greatest fear of her life for him. She showed him the deepest scars in her soul. And he had looked into her eyes, knowing his family had killed hers, and still he had lied. He closed his eyes, and her face rose up before him, her eyes the last time she looked at him, cold, distant, as if he had died in her sight. Roman, he called. The door opened at once. Roman had been waiting outside. Boss, find out everything about the Sinclair Creek Bridge collapse, Dominic said, and now there was determination in his voice. Every document my father signed, every email, every memo, every person who knew and did nothing. I want all of it. Roman nodded. And find out where she went, Dominic added, softer but waited. Roman watched him for a long moment. You want to bring her back? No, Dominic shook his head. I want to earn the right to ask for her forgiveness. Roman said nothing, only nodded and left. Dominic sat there in the dark, alone with his thoughts. In 18 years of power, he had never begged anyone for anything. But for the first time in his life, Dominic Vaughn was willing to kneel. 3 days later, Dominic Vaughn stood in front of Ilara's small cabin, wooden crutches tucked under both arms. His legs still throbbed with vicious pain, every step its own punishment, but he did not care. He had made Roman bring him here the moment they found the address, ignoring the doctor's warning that he needed to stay in bed for at least a week. The cabin sat silent in the foggy morning, but smoke rose from the chimney. She was still here. She had not left. Dominic drew a deep breath, trying to steady the wild beat of his heart. He had faced the most brutal drug lords, stared down gun barrels without blinking, ordered executions without a tremor in his hand. But now, standing in front of this old wooden door, he was more afraid than he had ever been. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Still silence. He knew she was inside. She was ignoring him. He pushed the door. It was not locked, and he stepped in. Ilara stood in the middle of the cabin. A pack lay open on the bed, clothes and supplies stacked neatly beside it. She was packing. She was going to leave. When she saw him, she went still, eyes cold as ice. You should not be here, she said, her voice empty of feeling. Dominic stayed in the doorway, crutches braced on the wooden floor. I know, but I am. Silence hung between them, heavy as lead. Ilara turned back and kept packing as if he did not exist. I have something for you, Dominic said, reaching into his coat and pulling out a thick folder. He stepped forward, each movement a brutal effort on his broken leg, and set the folder on the table in front of her. What is this? She asked, still not looking at him. The truth. All of it. Ilara stared down at the folder, hesitated for one heartbeat, then opened it. Inside were dozens of pages. The engineering report on the condition of the Sinclair Creek Bridge, written 2 years before the collapse. The minutes from a Vaughn Corporation board meeting, where Dominic's father ordered repairs delayed to save money. Emails between engineers warning of collapse risk. And at the end, his father's signature on the delay order, plain and undeniable. Ilara's hands began to shake as she turned each page. Dominic stood there watching her read, and every second felt like a blade sliding into his heart. My father knew, he said, his voice low and bruised with pain. He signed the order. He knew the bridge was dangerous and he chose to do nothing. He killed your family, and no one was ever held accountable. Ilara did not speak. She kept reading, eyes scanning every line as if searching for something that would let her deny it. But there was nothing to deny. Everything was clear. Everything was true. I found out that night in your cabin, Dominic went on, when I saw the newspaper clippings, the documents you kept. I should have told you immediately. I should have confessed right then and there. He swallowed. But I didn't. I was a coward. Ilara finally lifted her eyes to him. Why? She asked, her voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me? Dominic met her gaze, eyes rimmed red but with no tears falling. "Because you were the first person in 18 years who saved me without wanting something back," he said. And every word sounded like it was being dragged from the deepest place inside him. "Everyone in my world wants something. Power, money, protection. But you saved my life and asked for nothing. You broke 5 years of silence just to tell me to stay. You faced your worst nightmare just to help me cross that river." He paused and drew a breath. "I didn't want to lose that. I didn't want to see that look in your eyes disappear when you found out the truth. I was selfish. I put my own fear above your right to know." Silence. Ilara stared at him, saying nothing. Then Dominic did what no one in the underworld would have believed he could do. He let the crutches fall. He dropped to his knees. Pain ripped through him like fire from the broken leg, but he did not care. He knelt at her feet, the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast, kneeling before a woman who lived in the woods. "I can't bring them back," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't undo what happened. I can't erase the pain my family caused you." He looked up at her. "But I can make sure it never happens again. I've already ordered the bridge rebuilt, and every other structure my family owns will be inspected, repaired, or torn down. Every single one." Tears began to slide down Ilara's cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. She only stood there, looking down at the man kneeling at her feet. "I can't earn your forgiveness," Dominic said. "I know that, but I can spend the rest of my life becoming someone worthy of what you did for me." He had never knelt before anyone, but for her, he was willing to crawl on his knees. Ilara stood there, looking down at the man kneeling at her feet. Tears kept sliding along her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. She let them fall, let them carry with them a piece of the pain she had held in her arms for 5 long years. Inside her mind, images surged back like slow-motion film. The moment she looked down into the ravine that night and saw a stranger clinging to a branch, about to slip into death. The moment she shouted, "Grab it," and heard her own voice for the first time in 5 years. The moment he held her hand in that freezing water and said, "I won't let go," and then kept his word. He had kept his word. In that water, when she nearly panicked, when Ethan's memory rose up and tried to drag her under, he did not release her. And now he was here, the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast, kneeling at the feet of a woman no one knew, begging for forgiveness he already understood he did not deserve. "Stand up," she said, her voice calm. Dominic looked up at her, eyes full of surprise and a thin, fragile hope. "I said stand up," she repeated, harder this time. Dominic tried to rise, no crutches, a broken leg, pain ripping through him with every movement. He swayed and nearly went down. Ilara did not reach out to help. She needed to see him stand on his own. She needed to know he had the strength to face what came next. At last, Dominic got upright, gripping the edge of the table to stay steady. Sweat broke across his forehead, his face drained with pain, but he stood. He looked at her and waited. "Your family killed mine," Ilara said, each word clear and brutal. "That will never change." "I know," Dominic answered, low. "And you lied to me," she went on, and this time her voice began to shake. "That hurt more than the truth would have. If you had told me that night, I would have been angry, but I would have respected your honesty. But you looked into my eyes, you held my hand, you said I'm sorry like it meant something, and you lied." "I know," he said again, offering no excuse, no extra explanation, only acceptance. Silence settled between them, heavy as a boulder on the chest. Ilara looked at him, and in her eyes Dominic could see the war being fought, between anger and understanding, between grief and compassion, between past and present. "I don't forgive you," she said at last. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Dominic nodded. He did not expect more. "But," she paused and drew a deep breath, "I understand why you did it. I understand fear. I have lived in it for 5 years. Fear of water, fear of memories, fear of my own voice." She held his gaze. "Fear makes us do terrible things. It made me stop speaking. It made you stop telling the truth." Dominic said nothing, only listened. "You want to make it right?" she asked. "Then make it right. Not for me. For them. For my parents. For Ethan. For every family your father's greed destroyed. For every bridge, every building, every shortcut that could kill someone." "I will," Dominic said, his voice steady as steel. "I swear on everything I am." "Don't swear to me," Ilara shook her head. "Swear to yourself. And then prove it." She walked to the door and opened it, letting morning light spill into the cabin. "Then go. Do what you need to do." Dominic did not move at once. "And us?" he asked, his voice light as breath. Ilara held his eyes for a long moment, and in that moment Dominic saw everything. The pain, the loss, but also something else. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. "There is no us," she said. "Not now. Maybe not ever." She paused. "But if you keep your word, if you truly change, come back in a year. We'll see." Dominic looked at her and understood. This was not forgiveness. It was a chance. One last chance, and he would not waste it. 1 year, he nodded. He picked up his crutches and limped toward the door. When he passed her, he stopped for a single second, as if he wanted to say something, but he stayed silent. Some things do not need words. Some things must be proven through action. He stepped outside, and the door closed behind him. Ilara stood alone in the cabin, silence settling over her like a familiar blanket. She walked to the family photograph on the wall and stared at the smiling faces. Father, mother, Ethan, and herself, from another life, when she still knew how to smile. For the first time in 5 years, she looked at the picture without crying. But she did not smile either. She only stood there, quiet, thinking. About the past, about the present, about the year ahead. Forgiveness is not a gift given once. It is a door we choose not to lock, and a hope that the other person will not break it again. 1 year later, the Sinclair Creek Bridge rose beneath the morning sun, brand new and solid, like an apology carved into steel and concrete. It had been rebuilt completely, with no trace left of the old, decaying structure that stole 3 lives 5 years earlier. A polished brass plaque gleamed at the head of the bridge, engraved with a formal line, "Sinclair Memorial Bridge," in memory of Thomas, Sarah, and Ethan Sinclair. Beneath it, in smaller letters, "May no family ever pay the price of negligence again." The dedication drew a crowd from Hollow Creek, the same villagers who once called Ilara the ghost girl now standing around and whispering about the girl who had returned from the dead. Ilara stood on the bridge, looking down at the Sinclair Creek River, flowing calmly below. She had changed. No longer a ghost living deep in the woods. She now wore the white coat of a final-year medical student, her hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. She had gone back to school, finishing the dream she once believed had died with her family. The old scar still crossed her palm, but she no longer hid it. She let it show, a reminder of the night she tried to save Ethan and failed. When she looked down at the water, her hand still trembled slightly. That wound in the mind had not fully healed, and maybe it never would, but she stood there. She did not run. She did not turn away. She faced her fear without letting it command her. Footsteps sounded across the wooden planks. Ilara did not need to turn to know who it was. Dominic Vaughn stepped onto the bridge, his stride steady now. No crutches, only a faint limp that would likely follow him for the rest of his life. A year had changed him too. He was still hard, still carried the authority of a man at the head of an empire, but there was something softer in his eyes, as if a layer of armor he had worn for 18 years had been peeled away. He stopped a few steps from her and did not come closer. He waited. He waited for her permission. "You came," Ilara said without turning. "I said 1 year," Dominic replied, his voice low and warm. Silence stretched between them, but it was no longer heavy like before. This was the silence of 2 people who understood each other, who had walked through hell side by side. "The bridge is beautiful," Ilara said at last. "It is the least I could do," Dominic answered. "There are 12 more projects across the state. Schools, clinics, roads my father ignored. Everything is being rebuilt, repaired, made safe." Ilara gave a small nod, still looking down at the water. "How are you?" Dominic asked gently. "Better," she said. "Some days, other days." She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. He understood. "I know," he said. Silence. Ilara finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were no longer ice, but they were not warm either. They were the eyes of someone learning how to live again. "I still dream about them," she said. "My family. The water. Ethan's eyes when he went under." "I dream about the cliff," Dominic replied. "And your voice. Grab it. That voice saved my life." Ilara's mouth curved slightly, not a smile, but close. "At least one of us listened. I thought about what you said," she continued. "About becoming worthy. And?" he asked, and there was an unease in his voice that the old Dominic Vaughn would never have allowed to show. "I do not know if you are there yet," Ilara said honestly, "but you are closer than you were." She stepped forward, shortening the distance between them. "I am not ready to forgive your family. I do not know if I ever will." What they did, what your father did, took everything from me. She paused. But you are not your father. You proved that. Not with words, with actions. She lifted a hand and placed it against her chest, right over her heart. Then she pointed to him. The familiar gesture, the same one she used that first night when he confessed Marcus's betrayal. But this time the meaning was clearer. I see you. I see what you have done. And I choose to stand here. They stood together on the bridge, watching the river move beneath them. Not romantic love. Not yet. Maybe never. But respect, understanding, possibility. Two people who had fallen, one from a cliff, one from a life, and both were learning how to stand again. Not finished, not whole, but moving forward. There are falls that destroy. There are falls that transform. Dominic Vaughan fell from a cliff and lost an empire built on lies. Alara Sinclair caught him, and in doing so she began to free herself from the guilt that had drowned her for 5 years. They did not love each other, not yet, maybe never, but they fell into something rarer. Truth. The river still flowed under the bridge. Alara's hand still trembled when she looked down at the water, but she did not run anymore. And sometimes healing is exactly that, not the disappearance of the scar, but the courage to stand beside it. This story brings us profound lessons about life. First, forgiveness is not easy or instant. It is a long journey that requires time and effort from both sides. Second, the past can cause pain, but how we face it is what shapes the future. Third, sometimes strangers become our salvation in ways we never expect. And finally, healing does not mean forgetting or erasing scars. It means learning to live with them with courage and hope. My dear friends, if this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, tap like, and share this video so we can spread meaningful stories every day. We would truly love to know how you feel about Alara and Dominic's story. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted? Do you believe in the power of forgiveness and second chances? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We always want to listen to what is in the deepest part of your heart. I wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for staying with us through this whole story. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.